I tried to tell you 2 years ago. A lot of you didn't listen, because I do listen to WLTH. I'm here every night, okay? I hear what you guys are saying about Ukraine and about Russia and about Putin and about all this stuff. I know a lot of you watch MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and the corporate media. And now we're finally starting to see that once again, the American public have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, and led astray to the point where even the New York Times are having to admit that, you know what, maybe this Ukrainian war ain't going so well. Yeah. Ukraine's admitting, I mean, the New York Times is admitting, and they were all for it, that Ukraine's military prospects are looking bleak. Western military aid is no longer assured at the same levels as years past, and Ukraine's summer counteroffensive in the south, where Yeager was wounded days after it began, is over, having failed to meet any of its objectives. Now the Russian troops are on the attack, which anybody in their right mind knew was going to happen. Ukraine is in a perilous condition, the New York Times is admitting. The problems afflicting its military have been exacerbated since the summer. Ukrainian soldiers are exhausted by long stretches of military combat and shorter rest periods. The ranks have been thinned by mounting casualties and are only being partly replenished, often with older and poorly trained recruits. The average person fighting for Ukraine right now is 43 years old, folks. They told you that they could beat Russia, remember? All we had to do is keep sending money to these people, and a country much smaller and much less battle tested than one of the biggest militaries in the world. I'm sure they'll beat them. But the New York Times go on. The shortage of troops is only one part of the problem. The other and currently more pressing issue is Ukraine's dwindling ammunition reserves, as continued Western supplies remain anything but certain. Yeah, we got a new girlfriend to take shopping. Her name's Israel. Yes. Ukrainian commanders now have to ration their ammunition, not knowing whether every new shipment might be their last. Wow, that is something, huh? Ukraine is in a dangerous situation. The New York Times is finally admitting that the counteroffensive failed and that they don't have the soldiers. The cluster munitions that Ukraine received from the United States have lost their effectiveness on its battlefield. Ukraine's manpower and arms shortage has worsened since the summer counteroffensive, like I said. Now, the United States and other Western backers pressured Kiev to order its forces to use high casualty tactics against entrenched Russian defensive lines. The result was Ukraine suffering massive losses and netting minimal territorial gains. Kiev is currently trying to utilize small drones to replace artillery, but the small explosives are futile against the reinforced Russian positions and armored vehicles. President Zelensky is saying that Ukraine is in desperate need of air defenses. He explained the Kiev's excuse me, I'm catching what all y'all are catching. Kiev's warehouses are empty. Washington has depleted the funding that Congress has allowed for arming Ukraine, and the White House has requested that the Capitol pass a bill that includes over $60 billion. Good luck for that. In funding for the war in Ukraine. However, Republicans are like, nah, that's not happening. They are demanding concessions from the Biden administration on immigration policy, which ties into what we're going to be talking about later on. Yes. It is unclear when the deadlock itself will be resolved. A second issue for Ukraine's feudal arms supplies is that Western stockpiles are becoming depleted. Our new girlfriend, Israel, needs them. Yes. You know the one that Obama gave $38 billion to? Over 10 years? Yeah, she's high maintenance. You know, she wants what she wants. And Israel is placing further demands on the U.S. weapons depots. Earlier this month, a senior UK defense official told the Times of London that the UK's weapons stockpiles are so diminished that the UK has nothing left. While Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines currently go days without receiving shells to fire at Russia, the U.S. is providing Israel with tens of thousands of 155 millimeter artillery rounds. Wow. Ain't that something? It was all good not that long ago, right? It was all good not that long ago, right? You know, Ukraine was shiny and new and, you know, had an enemy in Russia that we've been trying to goad into a conflict so we can get hold of that sweet, sweet oil and gas that Russia has. 40% of Europe's gas came from Russia at one point before the U.S. forced the rest of them to stop supplying gas to the rest of the continent. And so now here we are, you know. Now Germany is shivering. They're paying a lot more for oil and gas than they were. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was really Europe's one hope. Of getting cheap oil and gas. And now, a lot of times, here's the funny part, a lot of them are getting oil and gas from India. Who buys their oil and gas from Russia? So Russia's making loot. They making loot hand over fist. India's buying it and jacking up the price. And why is this happening? Well, it goes back to the start of the show, the intro. Dwight D. Eisenhower, January 17th, 1961, said it very specifically. We have to guard against the military-industrial complex that benefits from expanding its military might around the world. We have to guard against that. Our economy becoming dependent on militarizing the world, and here we are. Like I said 2 years ago, Ukraine is and always was a money laundering operation. And it's becoming more and more apparent on a daily basis that the only reason for this war, well, there were two reasons for this war. One, to draw Russia into a crippling, debilitating conflict that would drain it, and to make the military-industrial complex billions and billions and billions of more dollars. So now Ukraine is in a place where their elderly are often the only people who remain along the country's hundreds of miles of front line in a war against Russia. Some can't afford to get out, and others say that they are not abandoning their homes. This ain't me saying this. This is the New York Times finally admitting this. The New York Times is also reporting that more than $1 billion worth of shoulder-fired missiles, kamikaze drones, and night vision devices that the U.S. has sent to Ukraine has not been properly tracked. Here we go again. We've lost more than $1 billion. We've lost track. This story keeps repeating itself over and over again. Iraq, Afghanistan. We just magically lose place. We lose track of everything in every conflict, and it just so happens to make the military contractor so much money. My God, it's so funny that it works that way. So coincidental. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing keep making money Call back. I'll get you. I just need to finish doing this. I need to finish with these bullet points here. But call back. I will get to you before the break. But yes, every conflict we get into, the military-industrial complex gets richer. Raytheon, Boeing, the banksters, Citigroup, Bank of America, all these people get richer. Meanwhile, the rest of us are getting poorer. We saw how high gas got last year, or in the year before last, especially towards the beginning of the conflict. I was paying close to $6 at times. I was at my wit's end. Thank God we're back under $3. But I don't know I think that might be pretty temporary. I don't think that will last. And now, again, the New York Times and every other Western news sources having to admit what I've been telling you guys from day one, that Ukraine is a corrupt bleep hole. That's what it was before the war, and that's what it is now, and that's what it's going to be after the war. Corrupt. Zelensky is corrupt. He was always corrupt. He was listed in the Paradise Papers with all the politicians who had been caught with the bank accounts in third world countries and things like that. Now, at least the New York Times is admitting finally, which you could not admit for the first year or so of the war, which is that military corruption has become a headache for Ukraine. Following the resignation of their defense minister, Alexei Reznikov, they are stating that the one-day contracts worth $980 million, good Lord, were not fulfilled on time, and that part of the advance payment for weapons disappeared into arms dealers' foreign accounts. Shocking. Information about these embezzlements, including the New York Times, according to the New York Times, blows a hole in the Ukrainian people's support for Zelensky's regime. Again, how many times can this happen and you guys continue to fall for it? Every single time, there's always some crazy dictator, whether it's Saddam Hussein or it's the Taliban or it's Osama bin Laden or whoever. There's some crazy person that the United States is the only person who can go and get them, and we have to expand the military-industrial complex and bomb a bunch of people. Now we're in Israel. We're about to be at Israel. We're about to be back in the Middle East because Israel's dragging in Lebanon and Syria and all these other countries into their conflict. And now the Middle East is about to be on fire, and guess who's going to benefit from that too? You guessed it, the military-industrial complex. Same one that Dwight D. Eisenhower talked about in this week in January 1961. Now, how much money have we been bamboozled out of? Who wants to guess? Huh? Who wants to guess? $113 million.
Damn. Money.
Yes. Both are appropriate responses to $113 billion. That is appropriate. Those are Florida Evans was completely right. Damn.
No, you're lying. What makes you lie?
I am not lying, Ned Flanders. I am definitely not lying. It is 113 billion. I'm sorry, $1 billion. We have earmarked 113 billion since Russia invaded in, what was that, February of 2022? That's right. Meanwhile, we have people sleeping on the streets here in Gary, Indiana, south side of Chicago. We have immigrants showing up in all of our cities. I can swear I saw some migrants walking around in Miller. I mean, I know what Gary Negroes look like, okay? Like, I've been in Gary my whole life. Well, most of my life. I've been in Gary and East Chicago my whole life. I know what us region people look like, and I know what Chicago people look like. And I know what, like, some dude who, like, looks completely out of sort, wearing, like, a 1993 Team USA jacket when it's -6 degrees outside, looks like as well. And they spend $113 billion. We can't get health care. We suffer 1 million excess deaths every year in this country. We're definitely going to talk about that at some point. How many excess deaths we suffer in America. Americans don't have health insurance. You know, at least millions of Americans don't have health insurance. It is a horrific and tragic and blatantly criminal thing. It is a criminal thing that our government can find ways. You know, it would only cost $20 billion to end homelessness permanently in America. $20 billion. And we just earmarked $113 billion for a country that ain't got nothing to do with us, that's run by corrupt Nazis. Yes, I'm going to bring that back too, because a lot of them are Nazis. Zelensky may not be, but he's been in league with them, unfortunately, even though he's Jewish. Look up the Azov Battalion if you don't believe me. Every Western media news outlet wrote about it before the war started, and we had to pretend that Ukraine was full of a bunch of saintly, angelic people who never supported Nazis in any capacity. In spite of the fact that all the resistance leaders that they were interviewing, a lot of them had pictures of Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator, right in the back, oftentimes hanging on their walls, and they were trying to convince us, but no, there's no Nazi sentiment in Ukraine. You know, Putin is Hitler, not the people actually supporting Nazi collaborators. But here we go again. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this week we had a tragic situation. An American citizen journalist named Gonzalo Lira, who was very critical of this corrupt regime in Ukraine and very critical of the Biden regime. He died from neglect in a Ukrainian prison this week. He was somebody who from day one was seen as a nuisance to the Ukrainian government and the American government, because he always pushed back against the lies of both governments going back to the beginning. He came to prominence in 2022 when he emerged as a critical voice in the increasingly dictatorial Ukraine. He was arrested in May 2023 on charges of production and dissemination of materials justifying Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine, and helped to galvanize domestic opposition to U.S. funding for the war. Now, here's what really hurt him, was that the only people who were calling for his release are people like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, who now are, because they are anti-war now, are considered right-wing, but the whole time I was growing up, being anti-war made you left-wing. Which just goes to show you that the elites in our society can make reality anything they want. They can make reality any way they want it. They can just say, "Oh yeah, being anti-war makes you a Republican now." What? Being pro-war makes you a Democrat? Yeah, yeah. You should support killing lots of people and bombing 7 and 8 countries. Barack Obama, and Joe Biden say it's okay, so you should do that. A note written by Lira and provided by his father to the Gray Zone indicates that his death came after a nearly 3-month battle with pneumonia. Good Lord. A condition that was ignored by his Ukrainian jailers until just weeks before his death. His father, Gonzalo Lira Sr., who had spent weeks pleading with the American embassy to intervene in his son's medical emergency. He's the one who revealed Gonzalo Lira Jr.'s death. Emails reviewed by the Gray Zone showed that after learning of his son's illness, that Gonzalo Lira Sr. urged the embassy to intervene on January the 3rd. In a message to U.S. officials, he noted that Ukrainian authorities seemed to make an effort to conceal information about his health and well-being. This is what happens when you push back against the narrative of the military-industrial complex and Wall Street and the corporations in this country. If you're Gonzalo Lira and doing your job as a legitimate journalist and actually pushing back on the government sending $113 billion to Ukraine while people are starving in America, then they just allow the Ukrainian government to starve you and ignore you having pneumonia until you die. The really tragic thing was that before Gonzalo was caught, he released a video to the world to let people know that he knew that he was not long for this world.
The start of the genesis of this whole situation is because I had an opinion that went against the narrative. And that's why I went to prison. And that's why, if I'm arrested again, I will die in prison. So I ask you, please, as many people as possible, the American State Department knows exactly who I am and the situation I'm currently involved in. And they know the fate that awaits me. They know it. You know, they have that saying that, I forget the wording exactly. You know, I'm a little stressed out, as you can imagine. But they have that saying that people are fundamentally good, but for evil to triumph, all you need is the indifference of good people. Please don't be indifferent to my fate. I ask you this very humbly. Please recognize that, well, the literal death that awaits me if this doesn't work out. Understand what's going on.
Much respect and rest in peace to Gonzalo Lira Jr., a journalist doing his job, killed by the Ukrainian government and aided and abetted by the United States government, who, if he was anti-Russia and pro-Ukraine, you better believe they would have done everything possible to get him back home. But because he told the truth about this entire war being a scam, which it is, and now even people like the New York Times are having to admit that this is a scam that went badly, he paid for telling the truth with his life, just like the U.S. government is trying to make Julian Assange pay for him telling the truth with his life. All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to get into why immigrants are being allowed to flood into every community in this country, and it seems like our government doesn't seem to be too concerned about doing much about it. I got receipts. You know I got receipts. We'll be right back after these, humans.